Hey, it's Mark from the Run Testers. In this video, we're going to be talking about Coros. Now, Coros Wearables is a new watch brand, or relatively new to the kind of sports watch and running watch space. They started life probably about 2015, 2016, making connected cycling helmets, and then a couple of years later, they moved into watches. Now, their watches have always kind of been at the heart, made for triathletes, so it's obviously had to have strong running features as well as swimming and cycling. They've definitely evolved to be a much stronger choice for runners. Now, we've used all of the watches from the first Pace up till the most latest Pace 2, the Vertix and the Apex. So what we thought we'd do is pull together a video to kind of give you our experiences of those different watches, how they kind of sit in the range and what you gain or lose paying a little bit more, paying less, how they kind of compare to other watches out there, and just give you a better idea of what Coros watches are capable of. So yeah, here's our take on Coros and their family of sports watches.
So the Coros Pace 2 is Coros' most affordable watch. It comes in at $179.99 in the UK, and that's $199.99 in the US. And at that price point, it's up against things like the Polar Ignite and also the Garmin Forerunner 45. Now, it's safe to say when we did our multi-tester review, which you can watch around the channel here, all the run testers were really impressed with this watch. It came out with glowing reports from all of us. And the fact is, basically, you're getting a heck of a lot of watch for that money. So that includes GPS, GLONASS and Beidou with Galileo tracking coming in a future software update. You're also going to get built-in optical heart rate. You're going to get a barometric altimeter, which other watches like the 45 and the Ignite and even the 245, Garmin 245 don't have. There's also a compass, a gyroscope and a thermometer and an accelerometer for indoor tracking. So the other area where this really excels against the competition is battery life. You're going to get a 30-hour GPS runtime, at least on paper. That's up 5 hours on the original Pace, and it's almost double what you'll find on something like the Ignite or the Forerunner 45. That also extends up to 60 hours in low power GPS mode. Now, in our tests, we actually found that 30-hour on paper claim pretty much bore out true. We got a good amount of GPS runtime out of this watch. In terms of the overall low power mode, we actually found it came up a little bit, sort of around 10 hours short. But still, that is a commendable performance for a watch at this kind of price point. It's still way ahead of all the other competition. So when it comes to design, this is the lightest Coros watch you'll find, and at 29 grams, actually it's one of the lightest watches you'll find full stop. It's still got a 1.2 inch, 240 by 240 pixel color display. That's pretty standard up against other watches in this area. It's about the same kind of size. It's not a touchscreen, but we weren't really bothered about that. It didn't really make too much difference. We're happy with the button controls. Now, the training insights are pretty extensive on this watch. You're getting quite a lot of the things like VO2 max readings. You're going to get like a stamina reading as you run, which tells you it has your stamina decreasing. That's one of the things that's pretty standard across kind of Coros watches. That comes down to the Pace 2. You're also going to get your aerobic and anaerobic training effect during your runs. That's another feature now, which is across the board. And it's pretty comprehensive in that front. So you're getting quite a lot in terms of training insights, recovery, and kind of performance package in this watch at this price point. There's also running power on the wrist, and it plays really nice with the Stride foot pod. There's a deeper integration than you'll find on most watches. Other watches at this price point won't offer running power on the wrist either. So that's another big tick in the box for the Coros here for the money that you're going to pay. I think it's fair to say some of us really love the structured workout features. If you're the kind of person who trains, likes to set a structured workout before you go out, having that feature on this watch is another big bonus at the price point too. Now, on the downside, there is the heart rate, the optical heart rate. We weren't that impressed with the performance of this. It was a little bit laggy. It was a little bit slow to catch up, and in all of our tests, it didn't really do too well. But you can get around that by pairing in a chest strap, and actually at this price point, you can actually afford to kind of add on a chest strap and solve some of those problems using something a little bit more reliable. It's also worth noting that there are no navigation features on here. You're going to have to go up the price bracket to the Apex Pro or the Vertix to get those skills off a Coros device. But you know what, that's to be expected at this price point. So summing up the Coros Pace 2 then. Well, in our best watches video, which you can watch around here, we actually picked the Coros Pace 2 as the best watch under £200. You're getting so much watch here for your money that actually bang for buck, it's absolutely the best watch in the Coros lineup, we feel. And also, it's really, really highly competitive with watches out there at this price point. and it even punches above its weight up to sort of watches that are a little bit more expensive. There is a lot to like about this watch, and we recommend you take a close look if you're in the market for a new device.
So the Coros Apex sits in between the Pace and the Vertix. Now essentially the price point puts it around about where the Forerunner 245 starts and the Polar Vantage M. Now there is an Apex Pro, which Tom's going to talk a little bit more about. So I'm going to focus on the first two versions that launched kind of late 2018, which is when I tested them first. So what you get with these watches, you're getting two size options. You're getting a 42mm one and a 46mm one. Now the case materials are essentially at the core the same. It's when you look at the bezels, they're slightly different. So on the larger one, you're getting a titanium alloy, and on the smaller one, you're getting a stainless steel bezel. Strap sizes are the same material, but they are different in size, obviously. So 20mm on the smaller Apex and a 22mm on the larger Apex. Now, in terms of interacting with these watches, exactly the same. You've got a button and this kind of twisty crown button as well at the top. Now, that essentially is kind of become Coros's kind of signature kind of hardware feature on their watches, and what they hope to, I think, kind of achieve with that is that it's easy to kind of use, you know, when it's colder and you maybe got a pair of gloves on, and it's just easier to kind of use that button to twist to kind of go through your data fields. You can also use it to lock and unlock the display as well, and it's a little bit different to what Garmin and Polar and others kind of offer in terms of using the watch and how you can kind of get through your screens and look at your data fields. So in terms of running modes, there's 4 key modes that you can access. There's outdoor running, indoor run, trail run, and the new track run. And when you go into those different modes, what you'll find is some consistent settings across. So things like being able to create interval training workouts, ability to set up alerts based on pace and distance. Also, where relevant, you also have access to some navigation features. So on the Apex, both models, you get the ability to access breadcrumb trail navigation, which is similar to what Garmin and what Polar offer, and you also get a back to the start feature. Some other features worth highlighting that will probably be interesting to runners. You're getting some advanced training analysis, so the ability to look at VO2 max, training effect, training load, threshold pace, all things that are kind of driven through your logged workouts and using the heart rate monitor. You do get ANT Plus and Bluetooth compatibility, so that means you can add extra sensors. So that does mean things like heart rate chest straps, foot pods like Stride, and you do have the ability to get running power from the wrist, and it is a Stride compatible watch too. In terms of running performance for me with the Apex, it was generally very good. I did a mixture of runs, the shorter runs, the kind of longer runs. I've done races with these watches. Ultimately what stands out is the GPS is generally very reliable, doesn't keep you hanging around too long. There's enough in terms of like what you can see in terms of data. The data was fine. You can customize it, which is great. I don't mind the twisty kind of button in terms of, you know, scrolling through screens, but the other guys maybe not so much. But no major issue for me. Now my kind of earlier runs, I found the heart rate quite erratic, but since then Coros, which is something they've been very good, is that they roll out a lot of updates, and they roll out these updates across their watches. So what I found is heart rate performance for kind of steadier runs has become a lot better, a lot more reliable in terms of that data. But I would still pair it up with a chest strap monitor, which you can do, thankfully, quite straight, you know, kind of straightforwardly. So yeah, if you want heart rate data and reliable heart rate data, that is the way I would go. But in terms of running performance, I found it really, really kind of good on the whole. Displays generally fine to look at in terms of absorbing your data. And there's a lot kind of going on in terms of how you can customize and the kind of sessions that you can do with these watches. So you look at watches in kind of a similar price point, so things like the Forerunner 245. I think the 245 you're probably getting a nicer looking watch, slightly, and maybe screen. You're getting obviously more in the way of smartwatch features, so things like music and payments, which doesn't seem to be a priority for Coros across their range anyway, and it's not stuff that you get in the Apex, you're just getting notifications. Something like the Vantage M, I think Vantage M holds up pretty well in terms of battery life as well. I think the training analysis stuff that Polar does is maybe a little bit nicer to kind of, and insightful to kind of use, and that's not to knock what you're getting with the Apex. I just think maybe you're getting something a nicer experience with the Polar features. But when you compare to those watches, it sits, it doesn't sit uncomfortably and doesn't feel out of place with those watches. So if you're looking around this price point, the Apex is definitely worth looking at. And I'll let kind of Tom kind of dig into the Apex Pro and where that kind of sits with these watches, these options, and what you get on top of what you already get on the Apex.
The Coros Apex Pro is the upgraded or more premium version of the Coros Apex, which Mike has just spoken about. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the actual features of this watch because it is essentially a Coros Apex. But there are a few additional modifications that have been made to the Pro version to make it a little bit more interesting for those looking for a more higher end version of the watch. It comes in at almost £450 or $500. So instantly you can see that's quite a big jump from the normal Apex by £150. For that, you're getting a few additional features, but really the biggest issue I have with the watch is the price point, because it's not quite as much as something like the Garmin Fenix 6, but it's getting there. And that watch for me has significantly more features, does a lot more, and it just means that this watch is it's punching above its weight quite a bit when it comes to price. Features that have been added to the Apex Pro include the addition of a third button on the outside here, and a slight change in where the dial is located. It's not a massive difference. The addition of a third button is slightly nicer, and it does make it easier to navigate the systems, but it's by no means a massive difference from the standard version. There's also a touchscreen included in the Apex Pro, but it isn't a fully functioning touchscreen. You won't be using it for everything on the watch. It's only used in specific circumstances. If you really want a touchscreen, it's useful to have, I suppose, but really I don't use it a great deal. I much prefer buttons, especially when I'm using an endurance watch or I'm using a watch for running outdoors and I want to quickly modify settings or change things. So I don't tend to use the touchscreen that much. It doesn't have a lot of smart features on the Apex Pro, so the touchscreen's not really that useful for day-to-day use and kind of moving around the screens. So really, there's a touchscreen. I don't think it's that useful in this watch, so it's not really a necessary upgrade from the standard Apex. Probably the biggest thing that's been added to the Apex Pro is the addition of a pulse oximeter, as well as an updated heart rate sensor array on the back of the watch. That kind of gives you an idea of who this is focused on. It's for athletes who are really interested in altitude, how altitude is affecting their training, how that's affecting all that kind of stuff that you want to know about when you're training a lot in the mountains and things like that. Obviously, it's not a feature that's, if you're looking for a slightly more premium version of the Apex, and you're not looking to do some really intense mountain running, it's probably not a feature that you're going to care too much about. There's also a slightly improved battery life, specifically when you're using GPS. I mean, Coros has already got amazing battery life, and the other guys have probably spoken about this quite a bit. So a slight upgrade in that battery life is always a welcome treat, but definitely isn't a necessity with Coros watches. So you're already looking at a pretty good battery life on the Coros Apex. This will get you maybe 2 or 3 hours more. It's slightly larger than the larger of the Apex versions, only by about 1mm, so it's not a massive difference. It's a really nice looking watch. It's the Coros Apex and the Apex Pro are a beautifully designed piece of kit, and they do really just look great. The titanium bezel is really nice. Probably looks a bit nicer on this watch, a bit more premium. The design, the strap that it comes with, it's just really nice overall looking watch. I'm a massive fan of the Apex Pro in terms of design, and I love wearing this one just for looks. It's also slightly heavier, not by a lot. So this is 59 grams with the strap, so it's not going to make a massive difference from the standard Apex weight that you're looking at. It just feels great. You don't really notice it when it's on your arm. It's a really nice, comfortable watch when you're out on the trails and you just don't want to think about it. There's a backlight always on mode, which basically means that when you're in an activity, when you're out running and if you're doing long distance stuff at night, you can have a setting on here that means that you can always see the screen, so you don't have to press the light and play around with it to see it, which is a really useful feature to have. And it's something that a lot of watches don't have that, so when you're out running it is quite annoying to have to press a button to see the screen. So it just does that at a lower battery rate and means that you can constantly see what's happening without having to play around with buttons. For me, in using this watch, the GPS accuracy has been very good actually. I've used it for trail runs, for road races, for hikes in mountains. There's been a few issues with it, but nothing that I haven't seen on other watches, and the same kind of issues you get with every GPS watch. There's sometimes a little bit of dropout and things like that when you go into an area where there's big buildings and things like that. I actually used this for the New York Marathon, and it was pretty good for the whole thing, but obviously there's a lot of big buildings in New York. It did drop out a few points, which you did notice on the map when I went through the GPS afterwards. But overall, very good GPS, works very well. I've had no issues at all, really. Heart rate monitoring for things like running or hiking, very good. No issues at all. It kind of picks up all the peaks and troughs that you would expect to see when doing the activity. When doing activities that have higher peaks and drops or quicker peaks and drops, like HIIT training, if you were doing that, or interval training on a track, it does have issues. All watches pretty much have issues when it comes to those things. It's certainly not outside of the realms of every other watch that I've tested that still struggles when it comes to those kind of short, fast peaks. So really, overall, not many big problems with that. The interface, I actually really like the use of the dial. When I first got it, I did find it a bit difficult to get my head around because it is tricky to find things when you're using a dial because you've got to scroll through it. When you're using something like the Garmin Phoenix, you learn to find those buttons and you very quickly move back and forth and jump around and access things as you get used to it. With the Apex Pro, even though that you get used to the system, there's still an element of scrolling through to find things. So it isn't as quick as something you'd find with just buttons. The dial does make it nice and simple to use, and it is an interesting way to use a watch. The other thing I found with the dial is that it pushes out quite far from the side of the watch. So when you've actually got it on your wrist and you're moving your wrist back and forth, if you're doing that, so say you lean on something or you're adjusting something on your hat, you can press that button with your wrist, which is quite annoying because it pauses the watch when you're in mid activity, which you don't really even notice it's done it. And there's not really a way around that. You can't really deactivate that when you're doing it. There is a lock function on the watch, which is quite tricky to use. You can turn it 3 times to unlock it, but for me the interface isn't quite spot on. It's quite a nice interface. It works relatively well, but in certain use cases it's a little bit annoying having that button pushing out there, as well as scrolling all the time to try and find something. Same goes for the touchscreen. I don't really use the touchscreen on any sort of endurance watch because I do find it your fingers are sweaty. You're rushing you just want to quickly do something, turn it off, switch to a different screen. Touchscreen does make a problem with that, and once you get into that realm of it's not quite working, it becomes frustrating, and I just don't like using it in any sort of activity. When it comes to buying this watch, I would probably say that the Coros Apex is a far better option just because of the feature set that you get is almost identical to this, and it's significantly cheaper. So if you're looking for a great outdoor watch that has a brilliant battery life, go for the Apex because it is a fantastic watch. The additions you get from this, really you would only use if you specifically wanted those kind of altitude feature sets that exist in this watch. If you don't need those, it's a big price increase for not a lot extra. Other options would be things like the Polar Grit X, which is probably quite a bit cheaper, probably about £70 or so cheaper, and does quite a lot of what you get on here, as well as some nice training features. So that's a good option to go for if you're looking for a rugged outdoor watch that has a lot of these kind of outdoor features that you're looking for in the Apex and Apex Pro.
So the Coros Vertix is the top dog in the Coros range, and it comes with a kind of a price to match. It costs $539.99 in the UK, and that's $599.99 in the US. So you're looking at Phoenix money really, which puts it right in the kind of top bracket of watches. It's more expensive than any of Polar's flagships, and like I say, it's the same price as the 4 and a 945. Some pretty amazing watches up here that the Vertix is going to be competing with outside of Coros range. Really, the key appeal here, compared to the cheaper Coros watches, and indeed watches from other brands, is the design and the kind of hardware you're getting with this watch. It has a titanium frame and bezel. It's got diamond-like coating on the sapphire screen, so it's incredibly rugged and hard-wearing. It'll work in temperatures as low as -4 degrees centigrade. So again, ideal for heading up into the mountains if you're a big adventurous type. And it's got that kind of chunky, outdoorsy look to kind of go with that. It's a design that takes some cues from the Phoenix, it might be fair to say, and really it is designed for that kind of outdoor athlete, big trail runners, ultra runners, adventurers, that kind of thing. It's also very waterproof. It will work at 15 ATM. That's higher than something like the Phoenix. That's 10 ATM. It's higher than the other watches in the Coros range. And despite being quite a chunky looking watch, being a big watch, it's still quite light. So it weighs in at 76 grams when you're using the silicon strap. That's kind of just a little bit more than the Phoenix titanium version, and it's lighter than the Phoenix. Garmin's steel version of the Phoenix, which is kind of 82, 83 grams. So despite all that bulk, it's not really uncomfortable to wear. We've all used it for long periods. I was able to even sleep in it. I didn't find it too annoying, despite the fact it is quite a bulky watch. Battery life is the other really outstanding thing on this watch. It has 60 hours of GPS as standard. That will rise as high as 150 hours in kind of low power modes, and kind of Coros suggests it will last around 45 days. What really impresses and makes it stand out from even Garmin 6X Pro watches that also have 60 hours of GPS is that in between runs, the Coros doesn't lose any battery. It will just sit there doing nothing. Like if you leave this in a drawer, it will still be alive months later. I found I could get kind of 3 weeks of use out of it running almost every day. So yeah, it's basically, I think it's pretty fair to say it's the best battery life on the market from a kind of multi-sport watch. If you just never want to see a charger, this is probably the watch for you. Otherwise, you're really getting a lot of the same kind of software and features that are on the Apex Pro. You're obviously getting 24/7 heart rate. You've got GPS, GLONASS, Galileo to come, and it also has 24/7 blood oxygen monitoring on a watch that it might actually be useful for, because if you are someone who's heading up to high altitudes, then you do want to get that kind of information on your wrist and see how your body's adjusting as you get higher and higher up. Screen is the same as on the kind of a few of the cheaper Coroses, including the Apex Pro and the Apex. It's a 1.2-inch 240x240 screen, but this is a touch screen like on the Apex Pro. To say, I don't use the touchscreen myself. I much prefer the buttons. It's got the same kind of twirly knob that Coros have put in a few watches now, and I find that easier to use than messing around with touchscreens, especially during activities. But it's there if you want it. You're also getting kind of things that are on the cheaper Coros watches, like navigation, structured workouts, a whole load of different training modes, including the kind of water sports ones that were added recently, track run. It's exactly the same as the Apex Pro on that front. There's not really been anything added here extra for the extra money you're paying. Really, what sets it apart from other Coros watches is the design, which is obviously outstandingly hard-wearing, and the even bigger battery life. Now, the problem here is that obviously if you're in this price bracket, you are going up against truly extraordinary watches from Garmin and Polar that do pack a load of extras in, and we're talking really sharp training analysis and recovery analysis from both brands. Polar obviously really excels on sleep, how well you've slept and how well you've recovered during your sleep and how that kind of affects your training. Garmin's got similar stuff on that front. It also has added a load of smarts to their high-end watches, so you're getting music, NFC payments, weather, all these kind of things that just you don't get on Coros's top watch here. Really the upgrade you're paying for is very much the materials used and the battery life. And one thing that is obviously on the Phoenix range and 945 that would be great to have on the Coros is those full colour maps. They really help for navigation on the fly. You can create routes. You get things like Climb Pro, so you can see how much kind of climbing you have to do left in a long run or a long cycle. breadcrumb navigation with turn-by-turn directions is fine, for most of the time. But on a true, really expensive, all outdoor focus watch like this, the colour maps that you do get on the Fenix are definitely a boon, and that's something that would probably make a lot of people want to upgrade to the Garmin rather than the Vertix. However, it does have some unique selling points. Like I say, the battery life is the best I've come across in any watch, including very expensive Garmin's. The design's fantastic. Also, it is a completely titanium. It's an all titanium frame and bezel. Like, to get that from Garmin, you have to buy kind of the £800 version of the Fenix. So even though this is still very expensive, that's a lot cheaper for those materials. Obviously, there are versions of the Fenix Pro that cost £600, but you're not getting that titanium. So that is another selling point of the Vertix. Really, whether you want to upgrade for this from the Apex Pro within the range or even the Apex just comes down to how much you want that battery life and the increase in quality of the materials used. It's a very good watch, but I do think it lacks a little bit on certain areas in terms of training analysis, smart features, that kind of thing that you are getting on watches from other brands once you hit this real high-end price bracket.
So there you have it. That is our take on the Coros watch range. Hopefully you found it useful. We're sure you've got questions, and if you have, let us know in the comments. Now, if we had to pick one of the watches that we think kind of stands out from its range, we'd probably say the Pace 2, just in terms of value and what you get. That's not to say what you get in the Apex and the Vertix are not strong running options for you as well. We just think that the Pace 2 is probably the standout one at the moment. But we had generally good experience with all their watches in their range. As always, like and subscribe, hit the bell to find out about our new videos, and we'll see you for the next Run Testers video.